Britain is trembling tonight. A royal confrontation that hasn't happened in 3 centuries has just erupted inside Parliament. King Charles himself, the monarch who vowed never to interfere in politics, has stepped into the storm. And in front of the entire House of Commons, he demanded answers from Prime Minister Kier Starmer. What followed has shaken the very foundation of Britain's constitutional order. If you want to see how this confrontation ends, hit that subscribe button right now, because this isn't just politics, this is history in motion. Here's how it began. 2 days ago, at exactly 9:47 a.m., Kier Starmer stood at the dispatch box and made a statement that sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. His words were simple, but catastrophic. Quote, "The monarchy must modernize or become irrelevant." Unquote. The chamber fell silent. Every MP froze. Even the speaker's hand trembled as he reached for his notes. Within minutes, messages from Buckingham Palace started flying through private channels. Alarm, disbelief, and then a decision. King Charles would not issue a polite statement. He would not wait for the Prime Minister to explain. He would appear in person, before Parliament itself. Not since 1642 has a British monarch dared to do this. Not since Charles I walked into the House of Commons and demanded control over his government. History was about to repeat itself. At 11:23 a.m., a terse 34-word palace announcement hit every newsroom in Britain. Quote, "His Majesty the King will address Parliament directly regarding matters of constitutional significance." Unquote. The reaction? Instant chaos. MPs rushed through corridors, aides panicked, phones exploded with alerts. Because everyone knew, when the Crown speaks without permission, democracy trembles. The doors of the House of Commons opened, and every camera lens turned toward one man. King Charles, calm, silent, yet radiating a tension that could be felt across the chamber. Not since the days of Churchill had silence carried this much weight. Every MP, Labour, Tory, Independent, stood in disbelief. The Speaker's chair didn't even look up. And then, with one step forward, the King broke 3 centuries of political restraint. Quote, "Prime Minister Starmer, you have spoken of modernizing the Crown as though it were a relic, but this nation's unity is not a relic, it is its heartbeat, and that heartbeat does not answer to politics." Unquote. A gasp swept through the benches. Even senior ministers lowered their heads. The monarch was defying his own government on live television. For the first time in decades, the line between royal neutrality and political power vanished. Reporters outside began shouting, "Is this a constitutional crisis? Has Britain entered uncharted territory?" Inside, Starmer rose slowly. His voice was steady, but his face betrayed fear. Quote, "Your Majesty, I respect the Crown, but no office, not even yours, stands above democracy." Unquote. The tension exploded. Gasps, murmurs, the Speaker banging his gavel in vain. The UK was witnessing something unthinkable. A Prime Minister challenging the King, face to face, before the entire nation. And then the King gave one last line, one that will be quoted for generations. Quote, "Then let the people decide whether they serve a government or a kingdom." Unquote. The chamber erupted. Half stood in applause, half in outrage. Outside, protests began forming across Westminster. The Crown and the government were now officially at war. Within hours, Number 10 was locked down. Secret meetings began inside Downing Street, and Britain's oldest allies were about to turn their backs. What happened next changed the math of power forever. Within just 24 hours, Britain was no longer the same nation. From Washington to Tel Aviv, the world watched in disbelief as the United Kingdom's crown and government stood on opposite sides of history. Inside Downing Street, the lights stayed on all night. Kier Starmer's face was pale, eyes locked on reports flooding his desk, markets tumbling, palace influence rising, public split across the nation. A senior advisor whispered, "Prime Minister, if the King calls for public support, your government may not survive the week." But Starmer's reply was cold. "Then we'll show him what power truly means." And with that, a secret message was sent across the Atlantic, to America, to Israel, to every ally that once stood with Britain through war and peace. The message was simple. The Crown has interfered. The government needs your recognition, not the monarch's. But what came next shocked even Starmer himself. The United States remained silent. No official statement, no support, not even a call. And from Jerusalem came a short diplomatic message. Britain must resolve its own throne before it speaks for the world. That silence was louder than any declaration. It meant Britain stood alone. By evening, the BBC and Sky News were flooded with headlines. Allies distance themselves from London amid royal crisis. The world watches Britain's constitutional breakdown. Meanwhile, outside Buckingham Palace, thousands of citizens gathered, waving flags, chanting, "Long live the king! Protect the crown!" It was no longer a political debate, it was a revolution of loyalty. In the heart of Westminster, Starmer's ministers began resigning, one after another. The Speaker's chair sat empty. The government's grip was slipping fast. And then came the whisper that turned into a roar. King Charles may address the nation tonight. As the cameras were set and the palace prepared, one question echoed across every home in Britain. Would the king dissolve Parliament and end Starmer's rule himself? The night fell heavy over London. Every streetlight flickered with suspense as the world waited for a single voice, the voice of the king. Inside Buckingham Palace, silence ruled. Only the faint ticking of an antique clock filled the royal hall. King Charles stood by the window, looking out at a divided kingdom, a nation torn between loyalty and politics. His advisors urged caution. "Your Majesty, a statement could ignite the storm further." But the king turned slowly and said, "Then let it ignite. A leader does not hide when his people are lost." And as the clock struck 9, the national broadcast began. Across the UK, televisions lit up. The BBC interrupted all programming. From Manchester to Cardiff, every home fell silent. The king appeared, calm, resolute, unshaken, and his words carried the weight of centuries. "Tonight I speak not as a ruler, but as a servant of Britain's unity. Our democracy is sacred, but it cannot exist without honor. I will not stand by while deceit divides this land." The room erupted in gasps across the nation. The king continued, firmer than ever. "When leaders place ambition above truth, they lose the right to lead. Therefore, by royal council, I dissolve the sitting parliament. The people shall decide anew." The broadcast ended, but Britain exploded. Cheers filled the streets of London. Some wept, others shouted with joy. And in Downing Street, Starmer's team watched in horror. Within an hour, senior ministers began packing their offices. The pound recovered slightly, markets steadied, and a single headline dominated every screen. Quote, "King Charles takes control. Parliament dissolved." Unquote. Across the world, analysts called it the most defining moment in modern British history, a constitutional earthquake, and a royal victory no one saw coming. As dawn broke over Westminster, Britain stood still, uncertain, yet reborn. And one voice echoed across every headline, every living room, and every heart. The king has spoken, and the nation has listened. This is UK CoreNews, where truth meets power and Britain's story is told without compromise.